Thaddeus is a nickname. His given name was Judas, which means Jehovah leads. Thaddeus means Mama's boy. He was the youngest member of the group, so they called him Mama's boy. So Mama's boy and Shrimp spent much time together. As the youngest member, he was pretty quiet, but he could also ask the most piercing questions. That night at the table, he asked Jesus, "Sir, why do you reveal yourself to your disciples and not to the rest of the world?" And Jesus replied, "Because I will only reveal myself to those who will love me and obey me. If a man will not love me," he said, "he will not obey me. And those are not my words, those are my Father's." After the resurrection, Thaddeus spent time in Jerusalem together with me, and we had great times. But before long, he wound up in Armenia, where he ministered for 8 years or so before he too was martyred. My friend Thaddeus was clubbed to death by a mob. Philip was a good friend of John's. When John wrote his account of the life of the Lord Jesus, he mentioned Philip several times. Well, it's a Greek name, Philip. It means lover of horses. In our time, there was a huge revival in everything Greek. Greek poetry and theater and literature and Greek everything. Yeah, at any rate, it served him well. After the resurrection, Philip went to the province of Galatia and settled in the city of Hierapolis, where there is a world-famous spa. And I mean world-famous because it draws people from all over the known world to take the cure in the rich, warm mineral springs. It draws people both from Greece and from Rome. Philip has preached to them all. The citizens of Hierapolis used to worship a dragon, a serpent, as a living god. I say used to because one day Philip spoke destruction to the beast in the name of the Lord Jesus, whereupon that living god's eyes just rolled back in his head and flopped over on his back and died. The local pagan priests were not well taken with this turn of events. They arranged to have Philip arrested. Philip was tied to a cross and stoned to death. Matthew was the older brother of little James. He wandered far from his upbringing in the tribe of Levi to become a Roman tax collector. And still, one day as he was conducting his tax business outside the temple in his little booth, Jesus walked by and said, "Matthew, son of Alphaeus, follow me." Whereupon he said he just stood up and gathered up his things and closed up shop for good. Shortly thereafter, Matthew held a banquet in Jesus' honor and invited all of his Roman tax collector friends. He was anxious that they too might see the Messiah for themselves and believe. When Matthew wrote his account of the life of the Lord Jesus, he wrote in Aramaic, which is the language of the common people, even though he spoke fluently the languages of commerce, Latin and especially Greek. And he was the only one who mentioned the parable that Jesus told about the man who found a treasure in the field and then went home and sold everything he had to buy the field. I always thought he had done that because that was the story of Matthew's life. He had left a lucrative career as a Roman tax collector to follow Jesus. After the resurrection, Matthew went to Ethiopia, where he was slain by the sword. James was the older brother of John, and they were Jesus' cousins. Their mother Salome was Mary's younger sister. Oh, and I don't think I mentioned this before either, but the household of Zebedee, of which they were part, their father, was well off. They had both partners in their fishing business, Peter and Andrew, as well as hired help and servants. And still, John said one day they were mending their nets by the seashore when Jesus walked by and said, "Follow me and I will make you fishers of men." Whereupon they dropped everything. Their nets, they left their father, they left their affluent lifestyle to follow their cousin. Would you do that? Your cousin showed up where you worked and said, "Follow me, I will make you fishers of men." Would you follow him? Unless you were convinced, as they were, that Jesus was exactly who he claimed to be, the Son of God. James was the first of this number to die. He was put to death by Herod Agrippa. On the day of his execution, James gave such an eloquent defense of his faith in the Lord Jesus that the soldier guarding him claimed faith in Jesus as Messiah on the spot. James and his captor were beheaded together that day as brothers. I remember when it happened. John told me with tears in his eyes of the time that Jesus had said that James would be asked to drink the same cup of suffering of which Jesus himself would drink. "I never thought it'd be so soon," he said. "I guess none of us is guaranteed a tomorrow." At that point, there was a pause in the foot washing. I think there was this growing realization in the room that Peter had yet to have his feet washed. And so I think others began to hang back to see what Peter was going to do. I think Peter, for his part, was disgusted by the idea of having Jesus wash his feet, so he was not about to go to Jesus. But if Peter would not go to Jesus, then Jesus would go to Peter.
"Master, you should not be washing our feet like this."
You do not understand what I'm doing now. Someday you will.
"No! You will not wash my feet."
Peter, if I do not wash your feet, then you have no part with me.
Well then, wash my hands and my head, not just my feet.
A person who has a bath only needs his feet to be washed. His whole body is clean. And you are clean, Peter. But that is not true of everyone here.
How well I remember that exchange. I think I crouched down even lower behind that little bush over there. Peter had a mouth. Maybe the mouth. It brought him to great heights like the time he walked on water with Jesus. And it brought him to great depths, just like that. That night at the table when Jesus spoke of his betrayal, Peter stood at the end and crowed, "If everyone else runs away, I will die first," only to deny Jesus 3 times by morning's light. But Jesus was not surprised by Peter's denial. He even predicted it. And he never gave up on Peter. He just kept loving him and wooing him back to himself. One night after the crucifixion, Peter had enough of the discipling business. He decided he'd go back to his fishing business. And one night, he and several of the men at the table that night were in a boat. They fished all night and caught nothing. That morning, Jesus fixed breakfast for them by the seashore. And there he asked Peter 3 times, just like the 3 times he denied him, "Peter, do you love me?" I know Peter, by the 3rd time, he was exasperated by the question. And he said, "Master, you know everything. You know that I love you." Then Peter, Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." He's done that. On the day of his crucifixion,